pandemic has been a lucrative time for America's billionaires, with a new report showing that the nearly 750 billionaires here in the United States have collectively increased their wealth to the tune of $1 trillion. You know, you hear about all that fear mongering in regard to inflation. You hear about, oh, the business community is really suffering. But when you scratch beneath the surface, as we should know by now, the individuals who are suffering the most are workers, whereas the investor class, the executive class, is doing pretty well for themselves. Let me give you the numbers. Their wealth rose from $4.1 trillion to $5.1 trillion over the 12 months that ended on December 31st. That wealth rise could fund half of the Democrats' proposed 10-year, roughly $2 trillion Build Back Better plan of social and environmental investments. That legislation has been shelved, by the way, meaning that it's dead, meaning that Democrats have completely given up on it because they never wanted to pass a social spending package. How's that working out for you, Pramila Jayapal? You know, head of the Progressive Caucus, apparently trusted Biden a little too much in delivering that social spending package. Seems like he didn't do that, right? Anyway, Tesla and SpaceX founder Elon Musk was easily the biggest wealth winner of 2021. His riches growing by over 3/4, or $118 billion to nearly $272 billion. I don't know, is that enough money? Maybe not. His single-year wealth gain alone would more than pay for the Build Back Better agenda. Its $109 billion plan to offer 6 years of free preschool for 6 million children included. And as some of you might know, Elon Musk loves to brag about the fact that, ooh, look at me, I'm gonna pay some taxes. I'm gonna pay so much in taxes, everyone. But why don't we actually look at the numbers? How much is he paying in taxes relative to the average American worker? Well, Musk has recently boasted about facing an $11 billion tax bill last year, some substantial part of which is going to the state of California. But even if it were all going to Uncle Sam, it would represent less than 10% of his $118 billion wealth gain in 2021. Average families, on the other hand, pay about 13%, meaning a higher percentage of their money toward federal taxes. So just let that sink in for a second. People who make far less income are paying a higher percentage of that income toward federal taxes. Well, this man, Elon Musk, who saw his wealth rise in 1 year to the tune of $118 billion, is complaining or making himself out to be some sort of hero because he's spending about 10% of those gains on federal taxes. Now, the rich don't get richer through innovation. Some do, but when we're talking about the billionaires who made a killing during the pandemic, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about individuals who saw their wealth climb as a result of the stock market and its ever-growing performance. So why don't we look at that and why the stock market has performed so well, even as the pandemic led to mass layoffs, even as the Great Recession took place, even as COVID-related shutdowns took place. How is it that businesses performed so well in the stock market when there was all this chaos in the economy? Well, stock buybacks might have something to do with that. Share buybacks hit a record high last year. Companies in the S&P 500, a market index which tracks the stock prices of 500 leading US companies, repurchased shares worth over $245 billion in the third quarter alone. That's just in 1 quarter. These exorbitant buybacks helped US stock market indices reach record peaks. The S&P 500 broke 67 records in 2021 and increased its value by 25%. And for those of you who are like, well, how does that work? You have the Federal Reserve injecting money into the economy. You know, they gotta provide liquidity to the banks and the corporations, right? And you know what they do with that money? They just buy shares of their own stocks. And remember, executive pay the compensation package that executives are awarded with for their wonderful behavior usually has stocks involved. So if the share prices go up, that means that the executive's compensation goes up. So they literally have a vested interest to take that money that's being injected into the economy by the Federal Reserve to artificially inflate the value of the shares for their companies. That's really what's happening here. That's why there's this massive disconnect between what we're seeing in the real economy and what's taking place in the stock market. This is another reason why the stock market is not a good indicator of how the economy is genuinely performing, because it is a house of cards. And the Federal Reserve has played a huge role in that. Now, thanks in part to cheap debt and quantitative easing, that's what I'm referring to here when I talk about the Federal Reserve's behavior. The working class is feeling this disconnect from how the stock market is performing and how inequality is really exploding in this country. This is one of the ways that inequality continues to grow. But don't worry. The individuals who have made the most money during the pandemic, the billionaires who only got richer, are very unlikely to be taxed on their earnings, because remember, we're talking about the majority of their newfound wealth coming from the stock market. And in order for them to get taxed on those gains, they need to sell those stocks, and oftentimes they don't. So under current law, none of that gain will ever be taxed unless the underlying assets are sold. Now, Democratic lawmakers like Senator Ron Wyden have proposed a billionaire tax to mitigate this. It's not gonna go anywhere because there are too many corporate Democrats who stand in the way of passing this type of legislation. But what would that have done? Wyden's Billionaires Income Tax would apply to capital gains rate a total of 23.8% on the highest income taxpayers to the billionaire's gain of slightly over $1 trillion. The tax would be due annually on easy to value assets like stocks, which comprise much of the growth in the billionaire wealth. Now, again, that legislation is unlikely to go anywhere, but one thing you should also keep in mind is despite all of this, despite all of the pain and suffering that the working class has experienced during this pandemic, and despite the fact that there is no conversation in Congress right now in regard to another round of stimulus for ordinary Americans, there are members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, who are now thinking about another round of stimulus for businesses. Let me give you those details. In recent weeks, the talks have been led by Senators Ben Cardin, a Democrat, and Roger Wicker, a Republican. The duo in mid-December cobbled together the outlines of a roughly $68 billion proposal, two of the people said, which could include a mix of new spending and a repurposing of some unused cash authorized under previous packages. So are there any other details about this proposal? It's in the works. Who would benefit from it? Again, it would not benefit ordinary working Americans. This is about helping businesses because that is the top priority in this country. That is at the top of mind for our members of Congress. The early efforts have focused primarily on authorizing billions of dollars to help an array of businesses, including restaurants, performance venues, gyms, and even minor league sports teams that face another potential blow to their already battered balance sheets as a result of the evolving pandemic. I think it's abundantly clear where the priorities lie among our lawmakers, among our within our system of government. It's clear that when it comes to something as simple as the federal government rolling out free COVID testing, it's laughable. It's laughable to the point where the White House press secretary will laugh in the face of a reporter who asks a simple question about that. But then after backlash, of course, the Biden administration announces, no, we'll dole out about 500,000 free COVID tests. But it took backlash for that. When it comes to stimulus for businesses, there's no question about, they're already working on it in Congress. They have shelved the Build Back Better agenda, the social spending agenda that would provide universal pre-K, that would provide assistance with childcare so mothers who are struggling right now with childcare would be able to go back to work. It would finally do something to legitimately tackle climate change. That, it's shelved, it's gone, okay? That bill is pretty much dead. Congress is already focusing on another round of stimulus for businesses, which look, some businesses have been battered by the pandemic. I wouldn't have a problem with that stimulus package that's being worked on right now. But it does say something, and it says something pretty harsh about our economic system and our political system, that the ordinary American worker is completely left behind. In fact, you have lawmakers across the country, both Democrats and Republicans, demanding that everyone go back to work, including remote workers. But while we're all expected to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, rugged individualism for the ordinary American worker, businesses need that federal aid. They need that help, and they always take priority. Because we're ruled by corporations, we're ruled by capitalist interests. This is how it always plays out. And we really need to question whether we're gonna continue dealing with this system that tells us that we absolutely have to vote for certain politicians every election cycle, only to get the middle finger as soon as they're in the positions of power that we elected them for.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.